Welcome back. All right, this week's power rankings, and I'll just throw a reminder at the start. I don't care how many wins the team has. I don't care where they are in the standings. I don't care how many teams have beaten how many other teams. It's who I think is playing the best hockey right now. So that's how the power rankings work. The standings are the standings. I pay absolutely zero attention to the standings when I'm updating my power rankings daily. So that aside, let's start off with number 32. The team I could just throw into 32 and just leave them there. Actually, I debated whether or not to just have Chicago in the 32 spot to start the video because it feels like they're kind of tucked in nicely right there. That's their spot. 32nd overall Chicago. They get a win over Arizona at one point recently, but again, it doesn't pull them out of 32nd. 31st. This is a bit of a surprise to me. They've fallen this far, but they have. The Ottawa Senators. They dropped two more spots this week. They're down to 31st. They lose against San Jose tonight. Ottawa's really fallen off. Steve Stais has a really difficult job this year, this summer, to try to fix it for next season, right? Because I don't think Sens fans are going to accept we need to do another rebuild or we're going to tear this down. I don't think Ottawa fans are going to want to hear that. So we'll see what happens with Ottawa from here. Number 30 on the board this week, moving up one spot from last week, San Jose, the Sharks. Yeah, they're in the top 30 now, which, hey, they've moved up a spot. Honestly, all kidding aside, they've been playing relatively well, and Krona has looked good on and off. Like he has a good game, bad game, but there might be something there. So maybe with Krona, maybe he's one of the two goalies they have next season. I do think for San Jose that I understand people are mad about the Hurdle trade. This team I think is going to get better next season. I think there's going to be improvement for San Jose. And maybe I should just track all the users. Like, that's it, I'm done. I'm never cheering for San Jose again and see how many of them come back when San Jose starts winning. It's usually the way it works. And I say that as a fan of the Canucks that's watched that happen in Vancouver as well. Never cheering for the Canucks again. Now those guys have all got jerseys on. They're the greatest. Number 29, dropping one from where they were last week. The Anaheim Ducks. The Ducks 4-5-1 over their last 10. I know that because I just did the preview video before I did this. They've been playing well enough, but again, they're so far out of the playoffs, and they can still look pretty bad at times. But again, these two California teams, I think Anaheim's further along in the rebuild than San Jose. They did start sooner, and I think next year, going through California, it won't be as easy to win in California as it's been this year. And that even includes LA. LA's home record has not been good. Number 28, dropping two spots from last week, Montreal. So the Montreal Canadiens back down to 28th. I thought they gave Toronto a good fight tonight. Montreal makes you work for it. I will say that for Montreal. They absolutely work as hard as any other team in the NHL. They don't have as much top-end talent. You can see that with their blue line, there's a lot of really good young players there. But it's going to take time to develop. So, yeah, the Habs end up 28th this week, dropping two spots from last week. Number 27 on the board this week. I'm sure their fans are going to wonder, where are we? Well, Arizona's 27th. They move up three spots. Arizona's played better, but they did lose 14 in a row. So even though they've won, I think it's 3 out of 5, something like that. It's been a rough time for them. The Coyotes, though, with a pretty resounding win over Detroit last night, which is why when Detroit shows up on this board far sooner than they've showed up in a long time, don't be overly surprised by that. But yeah, the Arizona Coyotes move up three spots this week. I think they've been playing better. Number 26, moving up one spot from last week. Don't take Columbus lightly. Columbus is a team that is capable of winning its share of games, and they definitely have recently. They're 500 in their last 10, and they've proven that they can beat top teams if the top team. I don't know if it's a top team taking them lightly or they play up to those teams, but either way, Columbus has shown they're not easy to beat right now, and it's kind of made them fun to watch at this point in time. Number 25, same spot as last week. I want to see things get better for New Jersey. I do. The New Jersey Devils, start of the year, I was excited. I'm still baffled by what they did at the trade deadline, and I only say that because they're within striking distance. People all want to talk about who's vulnerable in the East. Well, in my mind, Detroit, Tampa Bay, and Philadelphia, all three of them are vulnerable. If New Jersey got themselves an improved goaltending tandem at the deadline, who knows? If they could have made that Markstrom trade take place, they could have pulled themselves at least to within a few points of a playoff spot and maybe got there by the end of the year. So I'm still baffled by what they did at the deadline. I understand people have tried to explain it. Oh, get rid of the Vanacek contract. But still, why not try to get better when there's a playoff spot that's right there? And their scoring is fine. It's the goaltending and the defense that have been the problem. Anyways, so that's your bottom row. Nobody new in the bottom row this week either. Nope. Nobody's dropped into or moved out of the bottom row. Kind of depressing, but we are late in the season. Number 24, dropping one spot. Pittsburgh might get into the bottom row next week. Pittsburgh starts the day tomorrow. They're at home against the Edmonton Oilers. That should be an interesting matchup. You've got Crosby and McDavid again. Crosby's not really Crosby at this stage. Like, he's still one of the best players in the league, don't get me wrong. But his ability to put the team on his back and pull them into the playoffs, it's not the same as it was, say, 10 years ago, and that's just how aging works. Pittsburgh's got some decisions to make in the offseason. They really do. And I will be very curious to see how Kyle Dubas deals with this. When Dubas took over the Leafs, they were already one of the better teams in the East, and he didn't have to touch the core. In this case, he's got an aging core. He's got a team outside the playoffs. How does he handle that? He hasn't been in that situation and is a National Hockey League GM before. Number 23, dropping 3 spots from last week. And the dream might be over for St. Louis. St. Louis, the way they've been playing over the last few weeks, I think the writing's been on the wall for a while. St. Louis is one that'll be interesting to watch in the offseason as well and see what they do and who stays and who goes. And, I mean, Hofer played really well. Do they try something crazy, like putting Binnington on the market? And I'm just throwing that out there with the idea that, you know what? Hofer could be a good starter. Binnington could get us a good return and that kind of thing, right? But I'm just saying, because there are teams needing goaltenders, at least putting it out there. Or if you think Hofer could be a starter somewhere, put his name out there. But yeah, so we'll see what the Blues do. They dropped 3 spots this week to number 23. Had to pause for coughing, so if you're trying to force choke me through the screen, it's working. Number 22, moving up 2 spots from last week. And Buffalo right now, they sit 30-30-5. They're not really in the hunt for the playoffs. It looks like they are because of the point system being the way that it is in the National Hockey League. I don't think they're in the running. I think the Islanders have a good chance of catching a playoff spot and passing somebody. I don't see Buffalo as being in the running at this point, but I do enjoy seeing them play well. I feel bad when I see people going, you know what, this could be the turning point. Oh, that was me last year. I can't do it. I promised I wouldn't. I still can't. So they have moved up the power rankings board. They're all the way up to 22nd, and we'll see. And I know last year at this time they were already into the top half of the board, so I don't see them doing that this year. Number 21, dropping 3 spots from last week. Minnesota. So the Wild dropped 3 spots. They did sell at the deadline, not a lot. Like they didn't sell off a lot of players. They didn't have a lot to sell off. They extended almost everybody. So they just got rid of their UFAs like Dewar and Duhaime, who are going to be missed by Minnesota. Let's not mince words here. And now they got a game against Nashville tomorrow, one of the hottest teams in the league. And so I do expect Minnesota to lose again. I don't think they'll end up in the bottom row by the end of the season, but I don't expect them moving into the top 16 again before the season's done. It just feels like some of these teams are done. We're a little over a month from the end of the season. They can look at the standings, count off the points, and realize this is how many teams we have to jump past. Probably not going to happen. And then you see your GM selling players at the deadline too, and that gives you the message as well. Number 20, moving up 2 spots from last week. The Capitals. Washington. The Washington Capitals are still in the hunt for a playoff spot. I don't know if they're going to be able to get it done. I will be fascinated if Washington somehow does. If the Capitals actually end up in a playoff spot at the end of the year, I don't know how you'd approach playing them in the playoffs, because if the approach is we'll shut down Ovechkin, Ovechkin really hasn't been the scoring threat this year. In fact, Capitals don't really have a top-notch scoring threat goal-wise. So, yeah, I would be fascinated to see if they did actually complete this run and made it into a playoff spot, how they would fare. And maybe they and Pittsburgh aren't chained together after all. So they've split on the board. Number 19, same spot as last week. The winning streak for the Islanders has been good. I did not end up moving them up past where they were last week, but they've been playing really well. They're 2 points back of a playoff spot, and I have the feeling that next week we will see them moving up on the board. Tomorrow night they're in Anaheim. They should win that one, right? So California trip means games you should win. So like San Jose, you should beat San Jose, that kind of thing. Even LA at this point, winning in LA is not considered to be as big a deal if you beat them when you're at home. So yeah, the Islanders still plugging along. Patrick Waugh's definitely got them playing their best hockey they have all season. And I think it would be fun if they made the playoffs again. But I will say this, if, say, Boston ended up against them at some point, I don't know if I would like Boston's odds against the Islanders right now, but Boston's got other things to worry about first. Number 18, dropping 3 spots from last week. And I think that in the case of the Flames, and I'll use the Atlanta puck because why not? In the case of the Flames, I get the feeling that even though they've had this charge and they're still kind of in the hunt, I don't know that Calgary, if there's enough track left for them to actually make the playoffs. And then you look at all the pending unrestricted free agents that got traded, and we'll debate what Craig Conroy's done. Over the next week, I'm going to look at some of the teams that are outside of the playoffs, what they did at the deadline, looking ahead and this kind of thing. Calgary's going to be a fascinating one to take a look at, but I do think that there's going to be some upheaval in the offseason. Markstrom didn't move at the deadline, but I would not be surprised to see him moved in the offseason and see what that brings the team in terms of a return. But yeah, it does feel like Calgary, it's just probably not enough time left for them to make it. I would love to see them make it, believe me. If I can get Vancouver-Calgary as a first-round series, I'm happy. Even though Calgary has a very good track record of knocking out Vancouver, those series just end up being bonkers. Number 17, moving up 4 spots from last week. Four fingers, not 3, 4. Moving up 4 spots from last week, Seattle. So the Seattle Kraken, at this time a couple days ago, they were actually in the top 16. They dropped down to 17. In part because of the loss they had last night. But Seattle's in a position where they're one of that boondoggle of teams that are 8 points out. The 8 points out category, I know it's Calgary, Seattle, I want to say Minnesota and St. Louis, I think are all 8 points out. But it feels like all of them are in differing positions. And Seattle hasn't given up on the hope of making the playoffs. But again, much like Calgary, I don't know that there's enough time left. Being 8 points back at this time of the season, it's really hard to make that up. Even if you have a game in hand or 2 games in hand on teams you're chasing, you're 8 points back. So you have to win those games in hand and then some, and then you need help. So for Seattle, they've stayed in the hunt. I don't think they're that far off from being a playoff team, but I don't think they get there this season. So that's your bottom 16. That's your bottom 16. Top 16 should be teams that at this point in time are going to be playoff teams. Number 16 on the board, dropping 10 spots from last week, Detroit. The bottom has really fallen out for the Detroit Red Wings. They looked awful against Arizona last night. They played better against Vegas tonight, but they still lost the game. And so for Detroit, with the amount of losses they've had in a row, and with where they're at in the standings, they could back out of the playoffs. We could see the Islanders take their spot as soon as this coming week, which would put the Islanders above the line too. So that top 16, by this time of year, I think the top 16 should be teams that are in the playoff spots. There are exceptions, but it should be. And so Detroit right now is number 16, but they're holding on by a thread at this point. Number 15, moving up 1 spot from last week because of Detroit and because they won in Florida, the Philadelphia Flyers. So they get destroyed tonight by Tampa. What I found interesting was Calgary goes into Tampa and beats them. Then they go into Florida, they get destroyed. Philadelphia goes into Florida and beats them, and then they go into Tampa Bay and get destroyed. The league's very unpredictable. Philadelphia may very well end up backing out of the playoffs as well. But there are three teams that are vulnerable in the East: Detroit, Philadelphia, and Tampa Bay being those three teams. But again, the Flyers move up the one spot because they did get the win over Florida. Detroit, not a team with a win over their last, I think it's 5 in a row, I think now, for losses in a row for Detroit. It's been a rough time. Up and down season, and it's another one of those downs. So we'll see how things turn out. Number 14, moving up 3 spots from last week. The Lightning, Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay is so wildly unpredictable. Vasilevsky's unpredictable. The whole team. The only thing you can predict is that Kucherov's going to get his points. Kucherov will get his points. Hedman will probably get his points as well. And then outside of that, you never know. You might get a team that loses 6-3. You might get a team that wins 7-0. The next game they could lose 5-1, and the next game they win 6-2. It's just they're very all over the place, but they are above that playoff line, and I think with that win tonight, combined with just all the teams that have kind of fallen off, I did remark even to Yvonne today about how there's this divide that's starting to really show up between above the line and below the line in some cases. While the Islanders are trying to blur that line. And for the most part, teams below the playoff line don't look like they're threatening to make the playoffs right now. So Tampa Bay is in 14th. Number 13, same spot as last week. Yeah, I'll use this puck. Why not? Your defending Stanley Cup champion Vegas Golden Knights. Vegas has had some good games, some bad games, and again, no idea what we're going to get from them one night to the next. I know there's a lot of people that are angry with what they did at the trade deadline, the fact that they're allowed to do that. Elliot Friedman tonight on Hockey Night in Canada said that one thing that he thinks could fix the LTIR discussion in the NHL is if a team, let's say Mark Stone, at the end of the regular season, he's on LTIR. What if he wasn't allowed to play the first 2 games of the playoffs? So it's one thing that apparently has been floated by a couple of GMs. It can't change until the next CBA. This is not something that they can do now, but next collective bargaining agreement, that could come in, where the idea is if you're on LTIR at the end of the season, then you can't play the first couple of games of the playoffs. I would go further and say, what if it was the first round? What if you said, all right, the guy's on LTIR, he's hurt, he can't play in the first round of the playoffs, and just leave it at that. So, I really think that could help to mitigate some of what fans get mad about, but you guys can let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I know people are going to get mad about the rankings and everything. It's fine. Number 12, moving up 2 spots from last week, the Kings of Los Angeles. The LA Kings, another team that's been up and down. They did lose tonight against the Dallas Stars. Their penalty kill's fantastic, but the penalty kill for the Stars was pretty good tonight as well. The LA Kings at home have their struggles. That is the one thing I'd be concerned about. The good news, if you're a Kings fan, is at this point it looks like they're starting the playoffs on the road anyways. Whether they're a wild card team, whether they're third in the division, I don't think they get second. It's possible. I don't think they do. But if they start on the road for the playoffs, that might be the best scenario for this LA Kings team, where they've been very good on the road and they've been kind of mediocre at home. Number 11. Dallas. Now, the Dallas Stars had a good week from a win-loss perspective. So they win in Anaheim, expected. They win in San Jose, really, really sloppy. And they were behind 6-3 in the third period. That game was kind of a disaster. So you can look and go, well, they came back and won it. But they allowed 6 goals to a San Jose team that really doesn't score 6 goals often. I'm pretty sure that's the most goals they've scored in a season. I'm nervous with Ottinger. Like tonight, Wedgwood played really well, and it makes me think maybe right now Wedgwood's the better of the 2 goaltenders, and yet Ottinger's had some good games mixed in there as well. So while Dallas has won their share of games recently, they've been playing well enough. I still have them ahead of 21 other teams on this board. I did not feel that they were a team that I was going to move up this week. And in part, it's because of the team that's in 10th. The team that's in 10th is the team that was in 10th last week, and that's Nashville. So the other feature of my power rankings as we wind them down is very often teams end up in the same spot. So we've got, how many teams are in the same spot this week? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. about a quarter of the board stayed in the same spot. And Nashville, they had the loss against Montreal this week. Not in regulation, so didn't penalize them much, but in the end, Nashville stays in the same spot they did last week. And I can't argue that Dallas right now is playing better than Nashville. And that's what I think of when I'm doing these power rankings on a nightly level is, okay, so you won the game, but does that mean that team moves past the team that's in front of them? Not always. Sometimes I look and go, okay. And that's what's been happening lately is I look and I go, this team's right around, yeah, they're playing where I think they should be. And so Nashville stays in the top 10. They stay at number 10. We'll see what happens next week. Number 9, moving up 3 spots from last week. And the funny thing is that Boston's not in the top row, so there's going to be Boston fans angry they're not in the top row. I think Boston's been playing better, thus the move from 12th to 9th. I think they've been playing much better lately. But was it just against Toronto? Well, they had the big win over Pittsburgh today, too. And I say big win in that they won that one. It really wasn't in any danger, but Pittsburgh loses their last 2 games by a combined score of 11-1. So we'll see if Boston stays in the same spot. If Boston has a mediocre week, they end up probably in 11th, and Nashville and Dallas move up if they have a good week. So I'm very impressed with how the teams in the top 12 are playing generally. I think where I'm pretty happy with how teams are playing is from 12th and up. From 13 to, I would say, 18, there's been some good moments. Or 13 to 19, there's been a lot of good moments recently. And this and that. And then from there down, more concerned. But anyways, now we move on into the top row. Number 8 this week, dropping 1 spot from last week. The Jets. Winnipeg Jets. They did not know what they were playing for tonight going into that game in Vancouver. They dropped 1 spot from where they were last week. Because the Canucks were in 8th going into today. And so I thought, all right, we'll see how things go in this one and whether or not Vancouver stays in 8th place or if Winnipeg drops into 8th place. Winnipeg dropped into 8th place today. Number 7, dropping 2 spots from last week. And I'm going to be curious to see how Edmonton plays in Pittsburgh because I've seen people commenting about Edmonton, how terrible Edmonton's been. Losing against Columbus, losing against Buffalo, these are concerns, but the Buffalo one was in a shootout, and Buffalo's been playing better, so I didn't really penalize them for the Buffalo game. I just didn't move them up for the Buffalo game for getting a point. They do get penalized and dropped for losing against Columbus. Now they've got Pittsburgh. They really need to go out there and take a Pittsburgh team that's been kind of defeated over the last couple of weeks and just, really drive it home and solidify their spot as the number 2 team in the Pacific, which they should be able to do. I don't see them catching Vancouver. They're 12 points back of Vancouver, but they should be able to hold on to second place, I think, because both Vegas and LA have had enough losses that they should be able to stay ahead of them with a good record. Number 6, moving up 3 spots from last week. As I said, Vancouver was number 8 going into today, so they'd moved up 1 spot. They ended up moving up 3. I was very impressed with how they played against Winnipeg. Not only that, when Demko gets hurt, whatever happened with Demko, and DeSmith goes in, they didn't skip a beat. They didn't change how they were playing. They played exactly the same style with DeSmith in the net as they did with Demko. And previous Canucks teams would, I think, have fallen back a little bit, played a little bit different. And maybe that 4-goal lead wouldn't have been as safe with the Canucks teams we had last year and the year before. Not that I think they would have been up 4 goals on Winnipeg. So very, very impressed with Vancouver right now. They're back in the top row, and we'll see if they end up moving up further this coming week. They do have a 9-game homestand that started with that game tonight against Winnipeg. The only concern I have is that they start getting a little bit lazy with the long homestand, which can happen. We'll see how it goes. And at some point in time, I will do a video on long homestands and how teams do with long homestands. I'll go through Hockey Reference and find as many of them as possible and look at long homestands. And I would say anything beyond 5 is a long homestand. Getting to 5, number 5 on the board this week, dropping 1 spot from last week, Toronto Maple Leafs. So the Toronto Maple Leafs being top 5, there will be those who aren't happy with Toronto being in the top 5, but they've played well over the last little while here. They do drop 1 spot from last week, and again, right up until number 12 here, I would say you've got teams that can move up a lot, and there's the potential for somebody to jump into a top row spot next week. Boston, Nashville, and Dallas, all capable of doing so. And for Toronto, I think they're playing well. The problem Toronto has is they're still going to be on the road to start the playoffs, and odds are it's going to be against Boston. I don't think Boston's going to end up finishing ahead of Florida. They're right there in terms of points, but Florida's playing better. So, yeah, I don't know if I like Toronto's odds in the playoffs if they get Boston again, based on how Boston's played them in the regular season. Not that that means anything. For all the analysts have talked about this is important because in the playoffs, not really. We've seen teams that own the other team in the regular season, and in the playoffs, it's a completely different story. But we'll see how things go for Toronto. Number 4, moving up 4 spots from last week. So one of the highest movers, Colorado. So there were 2 that moved up 4 spots this week, Seattle and Colorado being the biggest movers of the week. I went with a Colorado jersey because I feel like they're playing like contenders again. They got Nichushkin back. Makar started playing like Makar again. Georgiev's playing well. Annunen with back-to-back shutouts. I know they were against Chicago, but everything's starting to really line up for Colorado. So while I do believe they sit 3rd in the division, again, I'm not worried about the standings because when the playoffs start, the standings don't generally have a whole lot to do with who wins either. So for Colorado, they're really a dangerous team right now. McKinnon keeps his ridiculous point streak at home going, and so, yeah, watch out for Colorado. Number 3 on the board this week, same spot as last week. So what's interesting is Carolina has been 2nd on the board as recently as 2 weeks ago. At one point this past week, I did have them 2nd on the board, and they dropped back to 3rd. So what's fascinating to me is when I do these every Saturday, I move teams every day on the board. Every time that a game finishes, I look at the board and go, does that team move up or move down? And so it's entertaining to me when teams end up in the exact same spot at the end of the week. For instance, Vegas. They were down as low as 17th this week. End up right back in 13th by the time we reach Saturday. The Canes 3rd on the board. Their shot suppression's very good. They're playing quite well. I really don't have any complaints about the way Carolina's playing hockey. They can play any style of hockey you want to play as well. Maybe not as physically tough as some other teams, but physical toughness isn't just in hits and in fights. Sometimes it's how you take those hits and how you turn the game into your game. Make them play your game rather than you being forced to play theirs. And Carolina's one of the best in the league at that. Number 2 on the board, same as last week, New York Rangers. The New York Rangers at one point this week were 1st. They were number 1 at one point this week, and I thought, hey, the Rangers are back in 1st. I can't wait to do the power rankings. But between then and now, they've dropped back into 2nd place. The Rangers are still playing really well, and I think it's quite telling that in the top 5, 4 of them are out of the East. So, yeah, I do think the East right now is outplaying the West a bit, but in the playoffs, things can change. So it doesn't mean that a Western team won't win the Stanley Cup, just that during the regular season, the Eastern teams look better. And the New York Rangers look fantastic. Beat St. Louis tonight, made it look relatively easy, which means that number 1, same as last week, Florida. Florida's been number 1 for 4 straight weeks. This is why I said in a video earlier this week that Florida's looked like the best team in the league for a while, meaning that on the power rankings, they've been number 1 for a while, and to start the season, they were, right out of the gate, you could tell this team was going to be quite good. And even when they had their hiccups here and there, I don't think anybody doubted they were going to get near the top. And then you look at their additions. Tarasenko looks fantastic. He has a cup ring, of course, from 2019 with St. Louis. Florida's the odds-on favorite right now. Florida's the one that coming out of the trade deadline a lot of people like, and I do too. It's not an official pick as of yet because we're not to the playoffs, but since New Jersey's not going to make it, I'm going to have to pick somebody else to win the Stanley Cup. I usually do anyways, so I wouldn't be surprised if Florida's my pick when the playoffs start. But let me know your thoughts in the comments section below as always, and I know people will, and I know people will hate on the power rankings and all that, but also keep this in mind. We're at week 21, which means I believe it's 5 more weeks of power rankings, and then they're done. So there you go. Let me know your thoughts. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.